14th of July, we have another 4x4, and we got one place still to be allocated if anybody wants to volunteer for a 10-minute talk. 28th of July, we've got Marge Steiner and Peter Shepherd giving 20-minute talks, so two longer talks on that one. Marge is talking about Louise Manny and the Miramichi Festival, and Peter's talking about particular songs from Travellers. 9th of August is 4x4 again. We've got two places still available. And 23rd of August, we've got Anna Guinea talking about the Kenneth Peacock collection in Canada. So we've got these things booked up till 23rd of August. There is no escape. Every fortnight you have to be here, I'm afraid. But then after that, we'll see what happens. Don't forget that if you want to know about these sessions, if you want to be first in the queue for booking, please join the TSF, the Traditional Song Forum. Go to the website tradsong.org, because each time we have sold out and we have a waiting list, so don't leave it to the last minute. Please do join the Traditional Song Forum, and then you get first dibs on the places. And for those who have recently joined us, please don't forget to change your screen name to your full first name and last name, and you do that in the participants bit down the bottom there. And then the last thing is that today we have the 4 talks, and then we're going to have what we call a round table networking session. If we were all in the same room, we'd go around the table, giving everybody a chance to tell us what they've been up to, ask questions, to bond with each other and network. As there's potentially 100 of us on this call, we will not be going around the whole table. But if you want to say something, please raise your little blue hand, which you do in the reaction section? I can never remember whether it's reactions or participants, but down there somewhere
participants.
It says participants, right, thank you. And that raises your hand and we can see that you want to say something. Don't do that on the screen because I probably won't notice. So we're going to start with Margaret, if Margaret can unmute herself. She's going to talk to us, Don't Let Us Be Strangers, about William Montgomerie. Now, I'm not going to introduce everybody because you've had little biographical things about them in the pre-meeting emails. So Margaret is having some assistance by the looks of things.
Yes.
There she goes.
Yes, I am. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Don't Let Us Be Strangers. I actually just chose the title after the inspiration of the last get-together. I thought how lovely to see you all on the screen, folk I hadn't seen in years. And I had just been listening to a song from the William Montgomerie collection. So here I begin. I'll introduce you to the man who introduced me to them or to their work, Herbert Halpert. He was born in 1911 and he was almost a contemporary, but of course on the other side of the Atlantic. He was my folklore professor. He'd been a student of Lehman Kittredge, so he knew a thing or two about ballads. But I was very surprised it wasn't the ballad that he introduced Nora and William Montgomerie, the two of them. It was for their work on children's folklore. They began recording, audio recording, in the early 40s, and they were known for, well, several books, the first one. But Bill Montgomerie, as everybody called him, was a ballad specialist. He was a college teacher in Dundee, a man from Glasgow who'd grown up speaking Scots, and he thought, what a ridiculous education system we have. At the door of the school, 5-year-olds are told, do not speak that awful language. But when he was at university, he realized that was that language that allowed him to understand the ballad. So he began by saying, the rhymes, we must teach children rhymes and songs. These rhymes should precede the pleasure derived from the more mature folk songs and ballads. And that's just, he went on from there. but at the same time, he did collect. Well, you never often
Oh dear. Is everybody else getting that strange noise?
Yes.
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 So it's Margaret's end.
But
Oh dear. Are you back,
one
Margaret?
of the other WPA collectors collection. Whoops, can you hear me? No?
Not really,
I
Margaret.
Can you hear now? Yeah. Well,
Margaret, can you hear me? Can you wave at the screen if you can hear me?
Oh, she's gone.
She's gone completely. Ah, right. Well, we've never had this before. Martin, can you hear me?
can you hear me? Wait, no,
Uh,
you can't. No,
Margaret's back.
Margaret's back.
am I
Can you,
back?
Margaret, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right.
Can you hear me now?
You keep breaking up, and we've lost everything you've said for the last few minutes.
Oh, that's terrible.
And
Can you hear me now?
only just about.
Do you want to go on with somebody else until I maybe can pick up some better internet?
That might be an idea. Shall we do that, Martin?
I can come back on again. Can you
Sounds
hear me
fine.
now?
Sounds fine to me.
Actually, we've got you. Yes, we've got you now, Margaret. So,
Oh well,
but we don't have your screen. You've got to share your screen again.
I'll do that again then. Okay. I'll have to start this bit again. Okay. Share my screen again. Right.
Don't.
Oops. Oh, help us alive.
Sure.
Right.
You close your Dropbox. Close your.
I'm very sorry about this.
It's not your fault.
Well, it's dear me, what have I done with it? Open my PowerPoint. Yes, I'm trying to open my PowerPoint. Yep. Once more. Here we go. Sorry about this.
Recent Montgomerie.
Can you see it now?
No,
Not yet. Not yet.
No. Okay. Sorry about this. That was a complete internet failure. I'm very sorry, and enough to make me panic. You see. So there we go.
Ah, that's it. We have it now.
Are we back up and running? Yep.
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your screen.
Right. Well, I'll go back. So the Montgomeries.
That's it. That's where we were.
Right.
Yeah.
I was saying that he was a ballad specialist. He did a PhD in the ballad at the University of Edinburgh, and when Lomax came in 1951, he was absolutely certain who he wanted to work with, and one of them was William Montgomerie. Yet we only really meet him in the footnotes of other works. Most serious ballad scholars have come across his bibliography of the Scottish manuscripts, and he scrutinized all of Child's sources, every single one. And I often wondered why we never heard his recordings. So this was my lockdown project. I should listen to them. And I began where he began, with his recordings of children. But of course, was very lured away by the number of other songs. So when I finished this particular piece on him, it's going to be published next month, I then went on to listen to where he recorded. And this was his patch, just around that area of Dundee and the hills there. So it's south of Aberdeen and north of Dundee, St Andrews. And as his daughter remembers, her dad, in the 30s and 40s, he pedalled around Angus and Perth on his bicycle. And a Wirex machine, a wire recording machine. See, he was actually way ahead of the School of Scottish Studies in recording. That wonderful machine behind me is an example of such. And as she said, he didn't graduate to a reel-to-reel tape recorder until the 50s when he worked with Hamish Henderson and Alan Lomax. So here he is, and this is from when he started using reel-to-reel tapes from 1952. So this man was born in 1873.
Through the nooks and barley sticks, oh, yonder's my love Johnny's been yonder. He's been his apron pulling his eight me. He's pulling and he stays in that his middens no say bye. Yeah.
Oh dear. We've lost it again.
I cut the song short. It's quite long. And whips pair of horses. The song is any better? No. Can
No.
you hear?
Can you hear me, Margaret?
I'll carry on anyhow. Let me know when
In yon valley, yon kaputari.
you can't hear.
In yon valley.
I can hear you. Yes. Can you hear me now? No.
No, you're breaking up so much that we can't really hear you. We've lost your screen now. I think we're going to have to give up on Margaret. Yes, everybody nod your head if you agree. Shake your head if you don't. Yeah. Martin, is that all right with you? I can't hear you, Martin. You're muted. Martin, are you muted?
I'm not sure where Martin is. One issue might be that she's using a virtual background. I think that uses up the computer, can use up bandwidth in the background and computing power, and that may actually make it maybe the cause of it, but I'm not sure whether experimenting with that now is a good idea.
No, I think
I would recommend turning off the background because yes.
Yeah.
So I'm suggesting anybody else who's talking later should turn off the virtual background. I have a feeling that may be part of the problem.
Has anybody seen her chat? She just said that she's going to move to another room. So we'll wait a wee minute for that.
What I suggest we do is we move on to the next speaker. We'll come back to Margaret if she can sort herself out. And Martin, I can't hear you. Are you there?
Yes, you can.
Yes, I can now. Okay. Shall we move on to Lewis?
Why not?
Yeah, Lewis, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Just a bit muffled, but we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Can you see the screen? Have you got a PowerPoint presentation on the screen?
Not yet. Is it coming from you or from Martin?
From me, but I can.
Right. No, we just have you and Jane on the screen.
Oh right. Well, you need to. I've got a share screen button here. Do I press that?
Yes.
I just did it. It didn't do very much, but I've done it now. Okay. Now what do I do?
Select the appropriate slide.
Whiteboard. Oh yeah, PowerPoint. Okay.
As you did.
Press that and then share. Okay.
Hurrah.
Is that okay?
Yes, we have it. Good.
Right. Okay. Hang on. Okay.
Yeah.
The Bearman Digital Archive. And for me, Lewis Jones. There's Chris. Photograph taken in 2010, I think at the Hampshire folk map launch. There's the bigger picture of Chris with Yvette Stalins. Now, Christopher James Bearman was a folk song scholar, and there's his dates. And that's when he was born and died. The things to note there are firstly his poor health, which he suffered from throughout his life, and also his debilitating stutter. But those are the other details of his life there. He won a scholarship to a prestigious public school, but he left at 16, around the time when his brother died of meningitis. He worked for many years in light industry and clerical work. He had particularly bad health in the 1980s when he survived both a heart attack and cancer. He decided to relaunch his career at that time, and with the help of some money from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, he succeeded in matriculating to Hull University, where, as we shall see shortly, he did very well. His health, however, particularly his heart problems, got worse over the years, although he did continue scholarly activities to the end, including valuable work with Yvette Stalins on early 20th century source singers. He died eventually from heart problems in 2013 on the 22nd of October. You still following me?
Yes.
There's his education and qualifications. The important thing to note there is the first-class honours degree from Hull University, which enabled him to get scholarships for a doctorate. And also, when the doctorate had been successfully completed, some sort of spending money from the School Audi Foundation to continue his research into his source singers. This is the most important of the slides I've got for you. This is Chris's folk song bibliography. Now, I'll start off here with the bit in purple in the middle, the English folk music movement, 1898 to 1914. That's his PhD from the University of Hull. You can download it freely from Ethos, the electronic thesis online service. And there in blue, I put the link, although I can tell you that later on if anybody misses it now. It's well worth downloading. It's a very long but a very good read, full of meticulous scholarship. And then on either side of that, you can see there's in 2000, before he gained his PhD, who were the demography of Cecil Sharp's Somersetshire singers, and then above that, Cecil Sharp in Somerset. Those three things in particular are worth a read. Those three items that are really meticulously researched polemic against Marxist exegesis in general, and against the work of Dave Harker in particular, especially against Harker's book Fake Song. Harker's book was very learned. In fact, the Open University published it, probably impressed by the large numbers of footnotes it contains. But Chris, in even better and deeper and more accurate scholarship, effectively demolished Harker and other Marxist exegesis with those three particular works. So they are the core of what he did and his contribution to English folk song research, I think. Apart from that, the 5 new folk song entries that he put into the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, Clive Carey, of course, was a collector, but the rest of them were source singers: Kate Lee, Emma O'Bird, Joseph Taylor and Lucy White. Again, well worth a look if you're interested in source singers. And the folk maps, the 3 folk maps, which again can be downloaded. I've given from Bournemouth University. I've given the links there. Are remarkable pieces of scholarship. It wasn't just Chris, was part of a team, of course, led by Yvette Stalins, but they're well worth downloading and having a look at. That's Chris's published work on folk song. The comments on that, it's clear from I did the speech at the oration at Chris's funeral, And I had, from all over the world, I had acknowledgements of his quality as a scholar. I've just chosen one at random there. Professor Roger Renwick, University of Texas. Chris has hugely enriched English folk song scholarship. The second point about him is that he was, as I've indicated already, an anti-Marxist. Marxist exegesis was quite influential in the 1970s and 80s in particular. And Douglas Reid, Chris's mentor and PhD supervisor, correctly pointed out that he did, more or less on his own, single-handedly confront and confound Marxist and postmodern accounts, which are considered to be deeply flawed. And the third point about him as a scholar is he was a friend of Cecil Sharp and the great collectors in Britain in the early 20th century. Again, Douglas Reid is his mentor. He helped restore Cecil Sharp's reputation, putting the history of the movement onto a newly sophisticated empirical footing. Now, Chris Bearman, the man, well, he was a controversial figure, as those of you in Britain will know. He was cantankerous, he was ill-tempered, and he was argumentative. Very difficult man to work with. He was always arguing with me, and I was his friend. For people who weren't his friend, he was even more likely to argue in an even more extreme fashion. He was resentful with some reason, I think, because he thought that his scholarship entitled him to some kind of employment, not necessarily well paid or high up, but some kind of employment in the academic world. And he never succeeded in getting that on a permanent basis. It was always going from one grant to the next grant. But finally, I was his friend from 1998 onwards, after the Folk Song Conference of that year. And to sum him up, as I summed him up at the oration I gave at his funeral, he was, in my view, and in the view of many of his other friends, a diamond geezer, as they say, in the East End of London. I've got numerous anecdotes in support of that. And behind the irritable and irascible facade, there was a very honest and upright and very, very well-read man. I'll give one example of that. I myself was doing some work on a folk song collector called Francis Jekyll. Now, I'm not very strong on lady gardeners, and I didn't have a clue, never heard of Gertrude Jekyll. But as soon as I mentioned this to Chris, he immediately knew not only that Gertrude Jekyll was a lady gardener of repute in the early 20th century, but that a book had been written about her which included information about Francis Jekyll, and also the name of the lady who wrote the book and so on. I was able to get in touch with her, get in touch with one of Jekyll's relatives, and greatly advance my research. And that was just a commented throughout, you know, in conversation. It was a brilliant drinking companion, rivaled the great Sam Johnson himself. He could go on for hours in the most, in a stuttery voice, but he was very, very influential. Okay, now the reason why I'm here today really is because I'm Chris's literary executor, and I've come to describe to you the Bearman Digital Archive, as I've called it. 3.5-inch discs. I, as literary executor, have acquired the contents of 51 old 3.5-inch computer discs. The disc contents have disregarded all personal files and files of the suffragettes, which Chris also worked on, and that leaves about 212 files relevant to folk music. Now, as I say, some of the content, some of the discs are blank, some of the files are blank. A lot of the files are duplicates or different versions of other files. A lot of the material has been published either in the doctoral thesis or in the published scholarship. Some files were compiled with a second person, and at least one file has been put under copyright. Now, looking at that, what is the value of this archive? Well, three things here again that I'd stress. Firstly, Chris, like many of our top folk song scholars, was in fact musically illiterate. He couldn't read music. His legacy is therefore of limited value to scholars who are interested in the tunes and in the melodies. Secondly, the polemic, unlike the detailed and meticulous scholarship that underlies it, the polemic, I think, is outdated now. We've moved on, haven't we? In a sense, it's down to Chris because he did a pretty good job of demolishing Marxist exegesis while he was working on it. But it's not just that; it's the fall of the Soviet Union. It's the it's the failure of Marxism or socialism to grip our young people anymore. And we've moved on, and the folks on world has now got different agendas, and in my view, rather better ones. Now, the thing of any value in the legacy, though, is the valuable data on source singers. There are two questions, though, that have to be answered. First of all, has it been published? And I must admit, it's not really my field, the stuff that Chris wrote. I don't really know which, if any, has not seen the light of day already. And the second is Chris's collaborators. They clearly have moral rights over much of this data, especially data on the source singers. Now, I've got two, I haven't written them down because they're very tentative ideas, but I've got two ideas of what could be done with this archive. Firstly, there was talk at the time Chris was alive, I know, of a folk map of Devon to supplement the 3 existing folk maps. If we could get a folk map of Devon based on the considerable amount on Devonshire source singers that I've got in my archive, and I'm sure other people have got who worked with Chris, it would be a worthwhile and useful thing to do. Just put that forward as a suggestion. The second suggestion is there is an essay in this archive called Towards the Social History of Folk Song. It's quite a long essay. It's about 10,000 words long. It's about 12,000 words with the copious and meticulous notes that Chris was good at. I'm not aware that it's ever been published anywhere. I've got a feeling it might have been a bit too long to make it into into anywhere where Chris might have tried to publish it. I myself read a version in draft, and I've still got the file for that. And that was in I think I'm right in saying in 2005. But it's an idea. In my view, it's good. I've had a look at that. It's Chris on top form. It would be good if it could be published somewhere if it's never been published anywhere before. But having said that, friends, my conclusion is that for the reasons stated, the two reasons, you know, about me not knowing very much about his work and the question of other people having moral rights over the material, I intend for the moment to do not much with the archive unless prompted or unless suggestions are made. Okay, well, that's me, Lewis W. Jones at yahoo.co.uk, if you want to email me. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Lewis. That was excellent. I suggest we have questions at the end of all the sessions because we're already running late and I was told off last time for letting the meeting go on too long. So what we're going to do is push on through with all the speakers and then have questions at the end, if that's all right with everybody. Yes, I presume you're all right with that. So we're going to go to Keith Gregson. Are you there? Thank you, Lewis. That was very useful, actually.
Yeah, I've unmuted. No. Am I here?
Yes, you are.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Great.
And hear you.
Right. Oh,
but hold on a minute. We've got the Bearman screen back again.
Do I get rid of that, or do you?
I think you do.
What do I do?
I don't know.
Shall I just close?
It's gone.
Right. It's gone now. So Keith, are you still there?
I'm here. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Over to you then.
Am I up on the screen yet? Hello. Can everybody see me?
I can see you as a thumbnail.
Oh, right. I can't see me on the main one. What do I do? I've unmuted. I can hear me. How do I get on the...
Go to speaker view at the top, I think.
Where's that? Where's that at?
Top right hand side, speaker view.
I can't see that on here now. So, gallery view, exit full screen. I've got that at the top here.
No, don't correct. Click on.
Click on what? I've got gallery view or exit full screen. That's all I've got.
If you click on gallery view,
yeah,
does that change it to speaker view?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, so do I go into speaker view now?
Yeah.
I've done that. It's come back to gallery view.
Well, click it again then.
If it says gallery view, then you are in speaker view.
Right. Well,
Keith, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to share your presentation?
no, I'm just here. There's just me, and my presentation is just me. So
Okay. Well, we can see you anyway, so go ahead, Keith.
okay, that's fine. Right. Hello, everybody. I'm conscious there's people all over the world here, so every now and again I'm going to say things which the English people probably know about already. So, Keith Gregson, 71. I live in Sunderland, and Sunderland's about 10 miles south of Newcastle, 50 miles south of the Scottish border, if you want to know exactly where I am. The subject matter today is going back to the 1970s and 80s. And during that time, I was running folk clubs. And as a teacher, I was using, I'm going to call it music from the past. I'm a bit scared about using certain terms now, having heard the last one about folk and ballads and things like that. So I was very keen on using music in the past, and self-penned and contemporary songs in the history lesson in a large school. I was also working semi-pro in the clubs and carrying out research on music from my area, the northeast where I live now, and also from the other side of the country, the northwest, the Lake District, the Cumbrian area. If you are not familiar with that, if you look at a map of England, it's the area of England that's north of Lancashire and Yorkshire, between there and the borders. The whole of that area was my area of interest. And all this brought me into contact with a gentleman called Roy Palmer. And I know that people all through England will be nodding their heads there, but maybe some people don't know a great deal about Roy. He lived from 1932 to 2015, and he has an archive dedicated to him now. And if you go online for Roy, you'll see him described as a singer, a teacher, a folklorist, and a historian. From my personal point of view, I would put Roy down as a collector, collator, and deployer of music from the past to make it accessible to as many people as possible. And I hope that people who've worked with him would agree with me on that. He produced 30 major works at least, and hundreds of articles. During the lockdown, like most of us, I think I got down to some real must-do tasks. And one of them was a box I'd had somewhere at the bottom of a cupboard, which had on it Roy correspondence. And in that box there's about 70 letters, typed and handwritten, notes and postcards. Only a few of them are dated fully, but nearly all of them have got a day and a month in it. And I've been able to work out exactly which year they all came in. And what I did was I contacted the powers that be. Hello, powers that be there. And they suggested that it might be a nice idea for me to put them together and send them off to the RVW library, and also to write an article about it. And indeed, to talk to you for 10 minutes about what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing at the moment. So I have spent the last 4 weeks collating them. And here we are. This works. Can you all see that? There we are. They're all in here, all catalogued, all ordered, and good to go, as they say there. And I'm working on the article. So over the minutes that I've got left, and I didn't start my watch, I'll start it now. I'm about 2 minutes in, I think. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the content and the context of the correspondence I had with Roy over these years. Ran from 1975 to 1988. And I think this needs some personal contextualizing here. By the mid-70s, Roy had already produced a number of books containing songs from the past, including The Valiant Sailor, The Painful Plough, and Poverty Knock. There you are, there's Poverty Knock for you there. He produced these, and they were produced by Cambridge University Press. They contained songs, contemporary texts, and comment. Ideal for use in the classroom. And in 1975, I got the job of head of history at the largest comprehensive school in a county called Cleveland, a place called Hartlepool, about 1,700 pupils, 11 to 18. And in the same time, I actually just finished an MLit by thesis on English poor law, which I'd done part-time. So it was strange how these two things came together. I was very keen to use music from the past in the classroom to liven up lessons and to introduce youngsters to music from the past. But at the same time, having just completed an academic thesis, I wanted to do some more kind of academic work, having gone through the hard yards. So those two came together in 1975-6. Right, that's it. I think that's a little bit, yeah. The bottom line is that I bought a classroom set of all his Cambridge University Press books, and I set up, some of the English people remember this, it was called the CSE Mode 3, which was an internally marked exam you could do in schools there for pupils who didn't do the major exams. And I based it entirely on the Industrial and Agricultural Revolution through songs and documents. And I think what happened was I sent a query about one song to Cambridge University Press. They got in touch with Roy, and Roy got in touch with me, and that's how we sort of set up them. And that's how it started. Why did it finish in 1988? Well, I didn't know. I had a word with my wife, and she said it was the birth of a third son, the emergence of soccer, rugby, and cricket with the older two, moving house, and two other things. The very sad and foisty old-fashioned national curriculum in history, which was introduced about that time, scuppered completely the course I've been doing. I couldn't do it anymore. And I actually moved from being mainly a singer to becoming a dancer. Some of you out there know me for dancing with Benfield Side, Morris and Sword, and I was barn dance calling, 4 or 5 times a month, and I think it just slipped away from that kind of thing. So those are the parameters of the correspondence between 1975 and 1988. So what's this correspondence all about? Well, I think the best way of looking at it is why Roy was getting in touch with me. First of all, he was extremely interested in the CSE course because he was writing a book. You'll notice it doesn't come up on the screen, the old-fashioned Gregson method here. He was writing this book called Folk Music in School, which was published in the late 70s. And he wanted to say a little bit in it about the work that I had done, which indeed he did. And then there's correspondence about a symposium which was supposed to be held at the University of York in about 1979. I've got a flyer for it, and it's little old me in the good and great of the folk world there, but it didn't take place. I don't know why, whether nobody booked in for it or somebody was ill, but I've got no memory of actually going and doing this. But the flyer is nice to have anyway. And then in the early 1980s, I wrote a ballad called The Ballad of the Great North Run. And I had it done like a street ballad and sold it for 10 pence each for charity and for a scanner fund. And Roy was very interested in this. We published it in English Dance and Song. And then when he was doing a history of the English ballad, he wanted to use that as a sort of modern example. And I don't know if any of you remember, but there was a lovely radio series he did called Broadside On, which was done in the early 1980s. And he used the song, the Ballad of the Great North Run in that. So some of the correspondence is about using that song in various ways. Then there's quite a lot about what I'd done on sort of the Northeast and the Cumbrian songs at the time could be used in any of the books he was writing. And this particularly came up in respect of the work I've done then on Robert Anderson, who Sue Allen has done so much more on that ever since. But he was interested in that because he was doing a book about, here we go, about Vaughan Williams song collecting. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. Folk songs collected by Ralph Vaughan Williams. And when he was writing that, he was particularly interested in a group of songs which Vaughan Williams had collected, which you could connect with Robert Anderson, the Cumberland Bard, who I was researching at the time. And finally, just before we finished our correspondence, he wrote a lovely book here, which is called What a Lovely War. Yes, which is, that one's about soldiers' songs of the 20th century. And he wrote to me, said, do you know anybody we could use in this book? And I said, oh yes, my dad, who played the piano, the guitar and accordion. And he was actually in the desert with his guitar and his accordion. And there is a picture here in the book. You can find it here. I don't even see that there. Can you see it? There's my dad in the desert with his accordion. And Roy recorded him singing a couple of little songs. And this is actually accompanied by a tape. And I think Hamish Henderson's on it and people like that as well. So there's quite a bit of correspondence about that. If I can reverse the process now and talk about Roy, what Roy actually did. He was a genuinely lovely man, and whatever he was researching, if he found something that he knew would be of interest to you, there was a note, there was always something that he sent to you that was either a photocopy or a link. And two of these spring very quickly to mind. One of them was, he sent me this ballad, and the note said, "This is absolutely appalling. It's badly written, it won't sing well, but it was published in Sunderland." And that's why he sent that to me. And there was another one, I'd just done an article about the songs of ballooning in English dance and song. And he'd found a tune called Sadler's Bloom, which he sent to me. And it's a lovely tune. And many years later, one of my group, the group I'm with now, the band, turned up and said, "I've got this fabulous little jig called Sadler's Bloom." I said, "Yes, I know all about that one." But that was typical of Roy. That's what he was like. And then in 1983, he very kindly agreed to write the forenote to a book I was doing about Ned Corvin, the singer-songwriter who Dave Harker has recently done a huge book on him. And he did a lovely foreword on it, in which he described me as a mole. I don't know what he meant by that, whether I was blind and ruttling around in the dark, but I actually think he was a person who used to dig away to find things. Am I still okay? A couple of minutes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, yeah. There was a passing interest in reference to his field work. He talked once about going to see Walter Parden in East Anglia. And he also references having a chat with a former officer in the International Brigade about the Spanish Civil War when he was looking for his work for his 20th Century Soldiers books. There's a lot of personal chat in it as well. He was a really caring man, always asking after the family and things like that. Caring and thoughtful. He was political, and he used to send little postcards every Christmas saying "A happy and non-nuclear New Year." It was one of the favourite ones I got from him. It says now, if I have time to have a look. Yeah. Oh, yes. The other thing was he came up a couple of times to Durham, and we did a joint sessions together to try and get people in schools interested in using songs from the past. And I was up in my garage yesterday, and I found this. The CSI, the DLI Museum, Folk with Roy Palmer. Yeah. And just to finish off there, here's an example. Can you see that? That is one of the letters that he wrote to me. And this is a lovely one about the song Andrew Rose, which I'd actually sung. I got it from Ye Mariners All. And I didn't know that the story of Andrew Rose actually started off with a journey from Hartlepool, where I taught, in a ship from Sunderland, owned and built in Sunderland. So Roy says, "Can you find out anything about this?" Wow. Well, I was keen to do that straight away. And finally, is that right? Finally now?
Yes, finally.
Here's my favourite one, and it's going to be the title of the article I write. It says simply, "Yes, please," to the female sailor. Right, I'll leave you with that then, folks.
Thank you very much, Keith. Thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. But it's long gone now. That's what I did a long time ago, and people have advanced all this stuff now, so I'm way out of it.
Okay, we'll have questions.
Thank you.
Afterwards. Thank you very much, Keith. I think we all miss Roy, actually. And Martin will tell you about the Roy Palmer Memorial Lecture later on. But we're going to move on to Katie, who's, I can see her, but I can't hear her. Are you there, Katie?
Yes, should be live now.
Yes, yes, we are. Straight on with Katie. Thank you.
It's just going to take me a minute to remember how to find my way back to PowerPoint. I'll be with you in a minute. Okay. Oh, sugar.
Mind your language, please.
Sorry, forgot. Right, I can't see the screen that I saw yesterday. Oh dear, now I'm doing it. I'm thinking, no, this is all going to work perfectly. And
Don't worry.
hang on a minute.
Don't panic.
I'm not panicking, not yet. Right, how do I do this? Share screen. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. We are sharing your screen. Yes.
Okay. So at the last meeting, there was some discussion about what attracts us to research particular themes, and for me, it's the stories behind the songs. Perhaps because I'm not actually a singer myself, the stories behind the songs and the tunes that drive me, the social context, who sang them and who listened and who wrote them and where they sang them and all that sort of stuff. So I decided to share a little case study of just one song with you today. But like anything, when you look at some apparently small subject, it suddenly reveals rather a lot of details. So I think it'll fit in 15 minutes, but it'll be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but there we go. The background to this is that for the last 6 months or so, in collaboration with step dancer Simon Harmer, who's on here today, I've been looking at the music which was contained on a barrel organ which Admiral Sir William Edward Parry took on his Arctic journeys to discover the Northwest Passage between 1819 and 1825. So during these voyages, the ships would be icebound for months at a time, and so ways of passing the time, keeping fit and keeping sane, which sounds a bit familiar to us these days, doesn't it? All these things were very important, and the sailors produced plays. They used a chest of theatrical costumes that had been supplied by the ladies of Bath. They published a weekly satirical journal, and they danced and sang. In this illustration, you can see in the centre of the three men is a Mr. Richards playing the flute, and it's known that Parry himself and at least one other man played the fiddle. In fact, Parry's fiddle is in the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. So they had live music on board too. On the right of the screen now, you can see a cast list for the rivals, which indicates that the men, obviously there were only men on board, so men took the women's parts, and they did this in dancing too. But interestingly, they also invited Inuit people on board the ship, and the women danced with them. Parry also noted down some songs from some of the women, although I haven't had a chance to look at those. I dare say I wouldn't understand a word of them, but he did note down songs. So John Longman's new invented patent barrel organ with bells, drum and triangle, which Parry took on board, is now housed in the Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge. It's on the left here. Well, unfortunately, I haven't been able to arrange a visit, of course. So this photo is borrowed from a blog post by Regina Kellner. But amazingly, literally within the last week, I was contacted by somebody. I put a little bit on my website about doing some research into this. And somebody from North Carolina, just last Sunday, contacted me with photographs of the twin to this barrel organ, including the list of tunes which were on it, which rather unexpectedly includes Barbara Allen, because they usually dance tunes. You won't be able to read Barbara Allen. It's been very, very difficult to try and get any information out of that, but we've got some. So the picture in the centre is actually in North Carolina, but it's exactly the same. And there's nothing inside it anymore, but it's exactly the same barrel organ as went to the Arctic. So about 2/3 of the 40 items on the Parry barrel organ are dance tunes, which seems to be fairly typical. The barrel organ lay neglected and inoperative for nearly 150 years until it was restored in 1972. And at that point, much of the music on it was published by the Sadisc record label. Most of the dance tunes on the barrel organ are English and Scottish reels, with just 2 jigs, both with distinctly Irish sounding names: Paddy Carey, which is a staple of the English session repertoire these days, and Paddy Rafferty, a well-known tune in the Irish repertoire. So here begins the interesting and complex backstory for the multifaceted, it's fair to say, Paddy Rafferty. Rather than going in strict chronological sequence, I'm going to look at some of the various incarnations of Paddy O'Rafferty, starting with the dance tune and a mention of the dance itself. In 1795, a tune by this name was collected from the playing of a Mr. J. Macaulay, I don't know what instrument he played, from Ballymoney in County Antrim, collected by Edward Bunting. A year later, in 1796, a jig, Paddy O'Rafferty, was published in Glasgow by James Aird. I think that's the one at the top here in this selection. You can also see in the middle on the right, underneath that one, there are some very brief dance instructions. The dances of the period were all in the same long ways configuration, and the figures are very formulaic, so you didn't need many instructions. From 1801, the tune was enormously popular as a dance tune at balls for the nobility and gentry. Sorry, some green lines just appeared on my screen. It's very disconcerting. I don't know why.
It's not on ours.
Oh, weird. Good. Okay. Yeah. So it was popular as for the sort of society balls, and it was often the first or the second dance of the evening. And the lack of copyright legislation, a bit more about that later, allowed for frequent republishing of the tune, and it turns up in dance and tune publications with great regularity. And as you can see here, in many different settings. In fact, some of them, the standard one's got 2 parts, but there are up to 5 parts in some variations on the tune. There's usually something in common with the other ones, but it's somewhat beyond me to start analysing all the different tunes and their relationships, I must say. And I just have to say thank you for this image, because I didn't get around to scanning them all myself. This comes from Paul Cooper, who's got a brilliant website called regencydances.org, which, even if you're not interested in dances, it's fascinating. And we have a little recording for you if it works. I hope this isn't going to blow everything like with Margaret's. Here we go. This is the recording off the Parry barrel organ. Oh, no, it's not. And so on. Well, so far, so relatively simple, but this is a traditional song forum, and I'm getting towards the song now. So I was fairly sure there was also a song by this name, so then I began to investigate the usual suspects: Vaughan Williams Memorial Library, Irish Traditional Music Archive, Bodleian, and so on. And these archives revealed a number of publications, broadsides dating from at least 1820, and songsters from later in that decade, printed in both England and Ireland. And there were also some unrelated songs to the air of Paddy O'Rafferty, showing how ubiquitous the tune itself had become. The English and Irish broadside texts that I've seen fall into 2 broad groups. The first concerns Paddy O'Rafferty's courtship and marriage, as seen as the example on the left here, which was printed in Liverpool. And the second group of songs, it's about how the marriage disintegrates and ends with Paddy knocking his wife into a bog, burying her and dancing on a grave, as seen in the examples on the in the centre and on the right here. And that one on the right just has to win the prize for the most inappropriate woodcut, because she did need a knight on a white charger, and it certainly wasn't Paddy O'Rafferty. Now, given the lyrics of these songs, I'm personally quite glad that they don't seem to survive much beyond the end of the 19th century. Singer Elizabeth Cronin from Cork is said to have known a song by this title, but in the book, The Songs of Elizabeth Cronin, Davy O'Cronin took a set of words from an unnamed ballad sheet, maybe from the Joyce collection, I don't know, which is actually the Death of Mrs. Rafferty song. And it gives her name, as all the others do here, as Biddy O'Doherty, which conveniently for Paddy O'Rafferty rhymed with property. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, we find Paddy O'Rafferty marrying a completely different woman, Kitty O'Donovan, and a completely different set of words in a canty-fable setting. So it's got the song and then some spoken interludes in between. This song, Tid Ray I, was printed both as a broadside here and as sheet music with a tune. It's not clear which came first. Certainly this song and skit was a big success for an English singer and actor, William Thwaites, who was engaged for the 1803 winter theatre season in Philadelphia, where the sheet music was published soon afterwards. So where did these words come from? And is this tune the same as a dance tune? No, of course it's not. That'd be far too straightforward. Well, now we've taken off our folk binoculars, and I hope they're not folk blinkers. This is when it starts to get even more complex, and from my point of view, actually more interesting, as the wider context for the song, it begins to be revealed. Now again, copyright laws, or lack of, and legislation on what could be staged in different performance venues, theatres mainly, meant that songs, dramatic pieces, and stage characters were used and reused, revived and repurposed, and that turns out to be the case with this song, Tid Ray I. The verses, without the patter, were actually written several years before by the composer and performer Charles Dibdin in London, who sang his own composition, which he called The Irish Wedding, in London at the end of 1796. He had some words in between with a bit more highfalutin, and in his original version, the groom only had the name Paddy or Pat, didn't have a surname, and the bride was anonymous, but it's exactly the same words. So it's becoming clear this character, Paddy O'Rafferty, had a life on the stage, and there obviously isn't time to go into much detail. There's plenty of it in the newspapers and journals of the early 19th century, revealing Paddy O'Rafferty's rambles around the theatres of England, Ireland, and America. So in the period before music hall developed, a night at the theatre consisted of at least 3 or 4 separate items, which could include a couple of dramatic pieces, maybe a farce or a pantomime. In the middle, an entr'acte entertainment, which might be a standalone song or dance item. There's often a prologue or an afterpiece as well, so it could be a long night. And almost all plays in this Georgian period included songs, which were changed at will to suit the character and the actor. So it's in this context that the songs about Paddy O'Rafferty and the stage character of Paddy O'Rafferty become increasingly entwined. You'll see here in the cast list on the right, in 1798, an actor, Irish actor called John Henry Johnston, played the part of Paddy O'Rafferty in a farce called False and True, which premiered at Covent Garden. And then it toured the English provinces after that, and it was staged for the first time in Ireland at the Dublin Theatre Royal in April 1799. And although Johnston sang songs, none of them was any of these ones we've come across already, but the character was established of Paddy O'Rafferty. Here's Johnston on the left again. Sorry, the actor is on the left here. From then onwards, Paddy O'Rafferty pops up regularly in the English and Irish theatre, sometimes in a comedy, sometimes in an entr'acte entertainment, and the character, and not Mr. Johnson himself, although I think he did, but the character certainly toured America. I haven't had time to look into that just yet. Perhaps the person who made Paddy O'Rafferty his own was another Irishman who specialised in playing stage Irish parts in both England and Ireland, the enigmatic Mr. Webb. In the centre here, he does look strangely like Mr. Johnston, doesn't he? Really don't know what's going on there, but they're both engravings. Clearly one is based on the other. So I know nothing at all about Mr. Webb, except there's a charming description of his 1822 season in Dublin in a lovely little journal called The Daily Visitor, or Companion for the Breakfast Table, which was published in Dublin. There are a number of plays featuring these various stock Irish characters, including Sir Callahan O'Bralaghan, that's what Mr. Johnson is playing there, Major O'Flaherty, which is what Mr. Webb is playing there, and on the right we've got another favourite Irish delineator, Tyrone Power. The name might ring a bell because he's the ancestor of a whole dynasty of American actors with that same name. And he again played all the stock Irish parts and took the part of Paddy O'Rafferty many times, as did many other lesser known actors during the course of the 19th century, carried on right through the 19th century in provincial theatres up and down the land. So that's our whistle-stop journey through Paddy O'Rafferty's kaleidoscopic existence, and here's just a brief chronology to round it off. So it's the name of a dance tune from 1795 onwards. What we might call a proto-Paddy O'Rafferty appeared without his surname in Charles Dibdin's song 1796. He's a stage Irish character from the time of False and True in 1798. It's the name of a country dance. We've got evidence of that from 1801 onwards. The character in this canti-fable piece that was a big hit in America. The comic dance, didn't get to mention that, but the comic dance. And another song I haven't mentioned at all. This one quite blew my mind when I first came across it. He's a completely different song, words by Alexander Boswell, arranged by Beethoven. And he actually uses the traditional Irish tune for it. And some of you might know more about that than I did, but I think I know about as much about it as I want to now, but there you go. And he's a character in two other songs. These are the ones where it started, really, the broadsides, as far as I can tell, but it's very, I'm not too sure about it yet. As far as I can tell, this seems to be later than some of the other things, but so hard to tell. So in the course of all this rambling around this, whatever it is, Paddy O'Rafferty, it occurred to me really a few big points. How key the recycling of musical themes and titles is, we all know that really, but I think the connections between different aspects of popular culture have really been brought home to me doing this. It's not just a song, it's not just a dance, it's not just a tune, and it's all those things. And the link with the stage, I think is, an area we kind of shy away from sometimes, thinking, oh, that's not folk music, but it was. And the third point really is that these barrel organs, going back to the starting point there, actually provide us with a really early, you can't really call them a recording, but musical reproductions. And just listening to that, actually there is a bit of a arrangement there, and that tells us quite, things that we may not have known otherwise about popular taste. And other people are looking into that. Again, that's beyond my capabilities. But I've been thoroughly enjoying my ramble around Paddy O'Rafferty, and I never want to look at him again for a little while now.
Thank you, Katie. That was great. Can I take my barrel organ to a pub session? Would that go down well? Margaret, are you still with us? Margaret Bennett? Is Margaret still around? Can we go back?
Yes, I'm still with you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes. Can we have another go?
Well, if you're brave enough to do so. I moved rooms. As I say, we live in the hills on the sticks, and but it was just unfortunate. I thought working on a bigger screen would be easier, but here I am on a little laptop and I can see you all.
Right.
Anyhow, shall I have a go? I'll start up my
Go to share, Margaret.
I've got to go to share.
First you start with share.
Sorry, hang on, start with share. Sorry, and oh dear me. Right, hang on.
Go down to Zoom.
Right, I've got to go to Zoom.
Open the Zoom.
Zoom, here we go.
Okay.
Now share my screen and
then there.
There we go. And
click on it.
And there it is.
And then you slide.
I've got it, right.
Play from the beginning.
So, are you okay for me to start at the beginning again, in case you didn't?
Go for it.
Right, yes. And I'll try to do a 10-minute, very fast summary. Wave at me too fast. The title, Don't Let Us Be Strangers. It came to me at the end of the last session. I just felt it was so lovely that you, Martin, and the forum should arrange this, and we should see people we hadn't seen in years on the other side of the Atlantic. And I had just been listening to some of the songs from the collection of William Montgomerie, a name that will be known to quite a lot of song scholars and narrative scholars, but especially to people who study children's songs. I first was introduced to him in the late 60s by my professor of folklore, Herbert Halpert, who was one of the greatest influence, I think, on a lot of folklorists. And he held up the collection and said, they were really the pioneers in recording in Scotland. This I learned in Newfoundland, by the way. They began recording in the early 30s, and their books on children's folklore were quite pioneering, and they were based on audio recordings. He used a small Wirex machine, and he worked with his wife Nora, who was an artist. They couldn't have been more different in personality and backgrounds. William was a Glaswegian and Nora from London, and she was an artist with D.C. Thompson in Dundee. They are well known for these books, but he felt it was best to start with children's folklore, because if we don't teach children, and if children don't learn the language in childhood, there's not a lot of hope for them to feel at home with these ballads and songs and traditional music later. So he said, these rhymes should precede the pleasure derived from the more mature folk songs and ballads, and indeed their fundamental quality attunes young ears to all poetry. I think that will always be true. Halpert also introduced me to this collection, and you'll be familiar with it, I'm sure. It's the collections made when Lomax came to the British Isles and well, to Europe really, in 1950, in his World Library of Primitive and Folk Music. He's one of the few people who really does acknowledge Montgomerie for the great collector, scholar, and he was a remarkable man. As you see, he sits side by side with the MacLeans of Rassay, Hamish Henderson, and William Montgomerie. Montgomerie, of all of them, was the only one who ever did a really scholarly piece of work. He did a PhD on the bibliography or the manuscripts that Child used, scrutinizing every one. His conclusion being that he didn't really do anything from oral tradition, they were all from manuscripts, but surely those songs were being sung, he had heard them. And so he began collecting using a small Wirex machine. He had moved to, you'll see his name in footnotes, endnotes, and certain, and you see them in Steve's Roud Index. He counts up quite often as a song that he collected. But books that we know well, you will find Montgomerie in a footnote or simply an endnote. So I decided, this is my lockdown project, I had asked if I would pick up some work I did about 20 years ago on his child lore. And so I dug it out and began listening again, and I just finished the paper, which is it's a sort of resume of his life and his collecting. But of course, using the online database Kist of Riches or Tupper an Tualchas, it's inevitable that the ballads and songs he collected also turn up. You'll see a couple of children's ones there and a couple of songs. So it was very tempting not to listen, but of course I did listen and was very happy to be sidetracked. But I decided that he really deserves much more attention than a footnote. He worked in Dundee, lived in Broughty Ferry, and this was the area where he collected. So it's south of Stonehaven, south of Aberdeen, north of Dundee, and into the hills there in Angus and Perthshire. His daughter Diane, who lives in Oxford now, remembers that in the 30s and 40s, he pedalled around Angus and Perth on his bicycle, recording songs and lore on an old-fashioned wire machine, not graduating to the use of a car or a reel-to-reel tape recorder till the 50s, when he worked with Lomax. And this is the kind of farm that the singers learned their songs. They were absolutely isolated in some areas, and so he began recording. This man was born in 1873, and I'm going to cut this recording very short, just a tiny little bit of the song, and then I'm going to zoom to Montgomerie's interview at the end, so you can hear his style. Bearing in mind that he bought his own machine and he bought his own tapes, it was an expensive business, and with a family to support, he actually, as many collectors then did, used tapes sparingly. But nevertheless, this is just gives you a tiny little sample of what he got. Can you hear it all? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay,
Yes.
here. Let's have a go now.
His poor and the he stays but his linens no say bud. Get it sailed or get to be, tell me no Johnny lad. What was it you got that one? Well, I got it off my brother. When he was a laddie, the ducks and barley stuff.
He learned it from his brother, and he can remember, it was a Sunday that he sang it to me. He can remember the farm, and Montgomerie asked him, was he just a boy? Oh, he said, I was working then. I had driven my first pair of horses. He was 14. And the song has, it's got about 8 verses, and it does turn up in the Greg Duncan, and much longer than the one, for example, from Bill Robertson. And another of the songs, this one is one of the many that have versions in the Ord collection, and again, Steve is onto all of them, but just it's not, of course, the same song exactly, but it's a version of, and here's a little snippet.
Long, long they courted, but ne'er spoke o' marriage, till he summer evening the lassie did say.
And so on. And the one that I chose, out of many actually, was this one. And again from a bothy, he was a friend of William Milne, and they had worked once at least on the same farm. And he remembers hearing this from a fisherwoman or a fishwifey carrying fish in the little village of Ferryden. So I've given you a small clip of the broadside that was sold in the poet's box. He doesn't mention the poet's box. That's not where he got it. He got it from an old fisherwoman, and he's just a small piece. Bert Cool is also in his 80s.
I hate to be unsociable with anyone I meet. I like someone to chatter to when I sit down to eat. And even if I go by train a mile or two away, and to my fellow passengers I very fondly say, don't let us be strangers as long as we're together. Friends will be if you'll agree, 'tis far the better plan. For life is very short, so let us all endeavor to be as good and kind to one another as we can.
He has several other verses. And I was surprised actually that the song doesn't turn up often, because many of the recordings of the archive of the School of Scottish Studies do turn up often. When I joined the School of Scottish Studies in 1984, I met William and Nora Montgomerie shortly after that. They retired to Edinburgh, and they were as active as they had been pretty well all of their lives. And I had a great privilege really to spend a lot of time with both of them, and with Nora on the children's lore and on her artwork, showing me it and letting me see where they collected. And finally, I'm sure it was very close to his last 2 years, he took me into his little study and went along his tapes, and also showed me the machine that he bought. A ferrograph it was, and that was his reel-to-reel. You needed to put that in a car because it certainly wasn't terribly portable. He was a remarkable man and published widely in scholarly journals. He did hope to have his PhD published, but that never happened. A copy was Xeroxed and went off to Sweden in great enthusiasm. We'll publish it there, but nothing appeared. And then eventually it was published in 7 parts in North Carolina. And that's the publication that has really, I think, been the foundation for many, many scholars, and including many that you know. But is the song still around, you might ask? Well, it is. And it's still in Ferry Den. So here it is, last year, recorded in that very village. It's called the Ferry Den Anthem. And this is a nice pub recording. There's the folk who were singing it. So we'll have a go. Well, it's a pretty lively version. So how many songs did I come across collected by William Montgomerie? And yet, I hope there's somebody out there who's heard more of a mention of his recordings than I ever have, although, as I say, I knew the man. Nora used to say, Bill wasn't a singer, and that might have been why. He didn't volunteer songs, although he was a very, very established poet. He was in the circle of MacDermid, McCaig, and in fact was known by, their first book was published, all Scottish publishers rejected it, but Nora knew that the poets in London might just listen because they knew Bill's poetry, so she sent it to Walter de la Mare, and it was he who inspired their first book, and the rest is history, as you say. So here it's just a list of what I found in the archives. I've been transcribing all of the children's ones, so that's finished now. But among them, there's a few more as well. Do you see your name in there, Steve?
I do.
Yes, I haven't annotated them, and maybe I won't, and maybe I will. But it depends on how the town goes, and I think that the Montgomerys deserve more than a footnote. They deserve more than a mention in the bibliography. They really deserve to be remembered as two of the greatest contributors to folk song of the 20th century and now the 21st. So I would pay a tribute to William Montgomerie.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. I'm really pleased that we held on there and came back to you there, because that was really good. Thank you. Right, now all our plans at the beginning for a round the table session have now gone by the board, but we do have about 10 minutes for questions and comments on all 4 speakers. In case I forget at the end, thank you very much to the 4 volunteers. I think it was a really good session and covered an awful lot of ground. If you want to say something, you go down to participants, click on raise your hand, and a little blue thing comes up. Katie is the first one. So Katie, unmute and speak.
It's John, actually.
Oh, it's John. Okay, John.
Keith Gregson. Fascinating. You mentioned What a Lovely War, and about the recordings that were done, and including the ones of your father on a tape, a cassette. You probably know I actually produced that cassette. The recordings are still available as a download, but also now as a CDR. If you'd like a copy, can you drop me an email with your current address, and I'll put one in the post to you.
Thank you, John. I don't see any other hands raised. It's Margaret Steiner.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. For Keith, 2 questions. are there any surviving recordings of the broadside on radio programs? Can those be found online? That's number one. And number two, where will your article be published?
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, right. Fine. I don't know. The suggestion was I should try the Folk Music Journal, which is about 40 years after I wrote the last one for that. But I might try for that, about 6,000 words. I think I could cover that. So probably there. What was the first question?
The second question is, are there online copies of the broadside on radio broadcasts that you mentioned?
Yes. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Well, that's a very interesting question, because when I was doing my research, I actually sort of went into Google and put broadside on. There's not much reference to it yet, according to, I think it was done as part of an educational project. I know the dates because Roy actually wrote to me saying it's been repeated and it's been repeated again, which was very interesting. So I know the dates when they were. I'll actually try and follow that up. Yeah. On what was said before, John, it was funny. My dad was a lay reader, and the two songs he recorded were very rude. And I was extremely surprised that he knew words like for his soldiers' songs. But there we go. Yeah. Lovely. Yes, I'll be in touch with you for that.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, they all were very rude. I had to put a warning on the album.
Yes.
Yeah, but you don't do an album of soldier songs and not expect them to be rude, surely.
No.
I mean, we'd all be disappointed if they weren't.
Quite.
Nobody else has got their hand up as yet, so I'm going to say something to Lewis about Chris Bearman, who many of us knew. I don't know if many of us knew him well, but we all knew him. And my interpretation is that he did a great job demolishing the Harker-esque Marxist view, and he was one of the first to do that, and we owe him a great debt of gratitude for that. But then again, I think he went a bit the opposite direction, and he was too keen on Cecil Sharp and believing everything that Sharp said. So I think he swung the pendulum slightly too far in the other direction.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I think what he really admired about Sharp was the actual songs he collected. I mean, I personally don't much mind people criticising Sharp for being a bourgeois or middle class or having the wrong attitude towards women. What I value about Sharp is the actual songs, and I think that's what Chris valued as well. But I'm surprised to hear you say that you thought you seem to be trying to denigrate Cecil. I can't really understand why.
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, not at all. But we don't believe everything that our ancestors told us. We, as historians, we look at everything critically, and I think if you read Chris's thesis, he does take it against anybody that criticised Sharp, whether they were right or not. I think that's what worries me.
I think if you're going to criticise Sharp, one way you can do it is by criticising sort of his musical sort of theories and his delineation of Appalachian tunes and the 5-note scale and all that. Some of that, I mean, musical theorists might wish to look at again and revise or even refute.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I can't see much wrong with him, really.
Right.
I myself have got sort of thoughts on his categorisation of tunes, which I may well make public one day. But
right, okay, I've got lots of blue hands coming up now, so we've got to move on. Matt Simons, Matt, are you there?
Hi, yes, Steve, thanks. Just picking up on the Bearman link, and also mentioning something that Lewis only mentioned in passing, which is forgivable because it's not necessarily germane to traditional song, but picking up on the fact that Chris did do an awful lot of pioneering research in the women's suffrage movement, and his research is actually becoming better known largely through the work of Dr. Fern Riddell. She recently published a book called Death in 10 Minutes, which actually acknowledges Chris's contribution towards that field of research. So I think that's worthwhile acknowledging as well. So
Yes.
thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Can I move on to Dave Hunt?
Question to Katie.
Say again.
It's actually Maggie wants question to Katie.
Okay, go ahead. You're very loud.
Oh, sorry.
Hello, Katie. I was just interested, as a total novice in this area, how much information is there on barrel organ rolls about tunes and things, or do you just recognise them, or if you wanted to carry this on further, how would you go about it?
Katie?
Sorry, what was the last bit, Maggie? Didn't quite catch the last bit. If you wanted to what, sorry?
I said if you wanted to do further research on tunes that were on barrel organ rolls or whatever, how would you go about it? How much information is there, or do they vary a lot? Or
I've found through looking at largely museum sites, Victoria and Albert Museum and Bate Collection and various other places that have got barrel organs, and some in private hands, that there are some listings of the music that's on them. They did seem to have a listing, presume it's handwritten, inside. So sometimes those listings have survived and sometimes the barrel organs themselves have survived. But it's a matter of digging about. I haven't found... I don't think anyone has written a thesis on it. There's one or two people have written about it a little bit, but I don't think there's a big body of stuff actually written about it. But the original material is out there to be found, but you've got to dig about and find it.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Paul Burgess. Are you there, Paul?
Hi, yes, thanks. Just a quick couple of things. One was I worked with Chris and Yvette on the Gloucestershire folk map. And I must say that one of the things that I found with Chris was that he was terrific at finding out stuff. He found out a lot about the Gloucestershire singers, but but I would say that about 30% of the factual information was incorrect in terms of dates and things. So he's a very good starting point for looking at stuff. The other thing I quite liked was that because of his wish to do down people who he saw as not liking Sharp, he did a lot of very good research on Granger, purely because he felt that people who were doing Sharp down were keen on Granger. Nobody was doing Granger at that point, and he came up with some terrific stuff.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah, Dave, no, John Baxter, our tech man. Where are you, John?
Sorry, I just got really distracted. I wanted to thank Margaret for that song, Don't Be a Stranger. And I'm currently desperately looking through my sources because I have a feeling it's a music hall song. One in the series. It's not. I don't think it's by Harry Clifton, but Clifton and others wrote lots of motto songs, sometimes slightly moralistic songs for music hall that sometimes were taken up by source singers. So I'm desperately now trying to confirm my hunch. But thank you. It was an excellent talk.
Yeah. So that's the last of the little blue hands that I've got. So
Martin wants to talk. He's a host. He can't raise his hand.
Oh, Martin, unmute yourself. That's it, Martin.
I was just going to say, over many years, I worked with and corresponded with Chris, and down on my bookshelves there is 3 folders of correspondence, and it's fascinating stuff. He was such a widely read man, and writing to me, he shared all sorts of stuff that I didn't know and which a lot of people would like to know about. However, I've got a problem with this correspondence because also he shared with me a lot of his opinions about people that I can't possibly share. So although I'll have to do something with this archive, it'll have to have a 30-year at least embargo on it. But it is fascinating stuff. He was an amazing man. If we had time, we'd share some lovely anecdotes like the time we did the wallpapering, but that's another story.
Yeah. Martin, you could redact it like an FBI file where you cross out the names, and then we could all guess who they are.
Yeah.
That would be fun. I'd like that.
What I may do is I might go through it and pull out some of the tastier gems, just because they're great. It's a great resource.
Right. I think it's time, before I get told off for letting it run on forever. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again to our speakers. These sessions are really, really good, despite all the technical problems that we have. And I really do appreciate people coming on and doing this stuff. One little bit of news is thanks to, we have now a YouTube officer, Mossy Christian, who is coming up there as a melodian. Oh, there he is. We now have a YouTube channel called Traditional Song Forum. And so if you go onto YouTube and search for Traditional Song Forum, all there is at the moment is a few tutorials on how to use my indexes, which I've put up there as a sort of test, really, to see if it works. But we hope to have other things up there, some performances and some talks and whatever we think we can put up there. So thanks to Mossy, go to YouTube and search for Traditional Song Forum. We'll see you all again in a fortnight's time, when we've got Ian Russell talking to us, and then a session on books. That one will be hosted by Sean, who's down there sitting next to Martin, just so that you don't have to hear my voice every fortnight. And that's all there is now, folks, so you may all go and have a cup of tea. Bye for now.